Tonight, we have a guest who was born and raised in a polygamy group, and she is a long way from there today. She's a renowned motivational speaker. She has a distinguished Toastmaster certificate, which is the highest diploma offered by Toastmasters International, and she was awarded the honor of Toastmasters International Area Governor of the Year, July 2008. She hosted a radio show program in Oakland, California, which developed into the current Rebecca Kimbel interviews on YouTube. She writes motivational articles regularly for the Eureka Tribune and the Humboldt Beacon newspapers, and occasionally writes for Safe Kids Now, Stop Polygamy in Canada, and others. I would like to introduce her and welcome to our show tonight, Rebecca Kimbel. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And you come all the way from
Eureka, California.
Okay, and you were born and raised in Utah, but now you are living in the Eureka, California area.
That's correct.
Okay. You have a very deep and a passionate interest in the efforts of what we're doing here to inform our viewers about the truths of polygamy. And that's what we're going to do tonight.
Indeed, I do. Indeed, I do.
So let's talk a few minutes about your experiences of being born and raised in a polygamy group. First of all, tell our viewers where you were born, which group that you were born in, and tell us a little bit about your family life as you were growing up.
I was born and raised in the AUB group. My mother was an Allred, and my father was an independent. And my father remained an independent, but I was raised an Allred. So I was raised in the AUB. I am one of 39 children born to my father's 6 wives. I'm among the 31 that he claimed as his own. We were regimentally trained from the moment of our birth in blind obedience and complete dedicated servitude. My mother, like other polygamist women, was in bondage to fear, control, and the blind obedience to a bloodthirsty and angry God that we were taught to believe in. I grew up in extreme poverty. The psychological and emotional needs of women were something that were considered a sin and that they were meant to overcome. In other words, their needs, any needs, physically, emotionally, financially, intellectually, educationally, were considered weaknesses to overcome. And I do mean even the use of their brain. It was not allowed. My father always had the first word, the last word, and all those in between. When I was a little girl, when my father was in prison, his youngest wife, Rachel, escaped with her 5 children. She died shortly after in an airplane crash. The state of Utah let my father out of prison and gave him back those 5 children that she had escaped with on his promise that he would never live polygamy. Of course, he took 2 more wives after that. And those children were raised to believe what he taught us all. He would gather us in the family and he would say, the finger of God struck that airplane out of the sky and killed Rachel because she broke her covenants to me. And he did it so I wouldn't have to.
My goodness.
We were raised continually on the blood covenants that if we did not live plural marriage, we would suffer eternal damnation, and the only way that we could be saved was by blood atonement, our blood. Jesus Christ didn't die for our sins. We had to die for our own. And the worst sin you could commit was not believing in polygamy after it had been told to you. After it had been told to you, you were worse than somebody that never heard it. You were totally going to be damned forever. And this is how I was raised.
And now you were raised in the AUB group with some filterings in of other groups as well. And I was raised in a Kingston group, and we were taught exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. And we've talked about this earlier, that really the only difference in the groups is who the leader is of where you're at, because and yet they all say they are the only true group.
That's
but
correct.
It's all the same stuff.
It's the same recipe. The same thick soup, but the same recipe.
That's right. Where is the value in the women or the children?
breeding and slavery, there is no value other than that. Commodities.
And the other alternative is to run and become a son of perdition.
Yes. And then you're subject to not only eternal damnation, but the men have a choice on how they want to handle it. The doctrine teaches they can use blood atonement to save your soul.
Mm-hmm.
The doctrine we were raised on teaches that. And it's available to be seen and looked at.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
And I was taught that all of my life.
And it was taught in the early Mormon church by Brigham Young and by many of the other actually it began with Joseph Smith.
Right.
But Brigham Young is the one that propagated it, and it was definitely a blood atonement doctrine where you had to die and shed your own blood for certain sins.
Right. Right. We had to be cut from ear to ear on the throat, and the blood would ascend to God like an incense to save our soul.
Yeah.
For the sin of what? Not finding blind obedience of following anything. If you turned away from the religion, if there's a whole lot of reasons they can kill you. So it became like the honor killings in the Taliban. If they chose to kill you to make them look better, it was okay with God.
Mm-hmm.
If they chose to be benevolent, not kill you, that was okay with God, but you were really no good. Because you were really bad. You were really bad, not worth anything. But you could live and be a servant. And so that's the category in which I fell.
Mm-hmm.
Ladies and gentlemen, she is the author of Prisons of the Mind, and I have just finished reading it. I couldn't put it down. It's incredible. Thank you, Kaziah. You might give a contact number or someplace they can reach you on the web at this point so they can buy it.
They have to get it through the used books because it's out of print.
Okay.
But anyway.
In the first group that you belonged to with your first marriage, which polygamous group was that?
It was the Johnson group. It was what has narrowed down now to this creep, Jeff's, that's in Colorado, Centennial Park or Colorado City in Arizona, whatever you call it now. I mean, it was the Johnson group. Guy Musser and Roland Jeffs and Dale Timpson and Carl Holmes and all those boys. I left that, and the funny thing of it is every time I'd leave one of these things because I could see faults, but I still hadn't given up on Mormonism.
Kaziah, your mom had promised to bring you up. Wasn't she a believer in Joseph W. Musser?
Yes,
Yes, so that is how you specifically got into the polygamist aspect directly, is through Joseph W. Musser's teachings.
Yes.
The Truth magazine, so-called of the day. So-called, because I think they were the most untruth magazines I've ever read. But anyway, so much of that.
I know it. You know what? So abandoned the doctrines of Jesus Christ, I am appalled that they dare to call themselves by his holy name. It just really chaps me.
You mentioned when you were a kid, a child bride, the hours that you worked and you got no wages and they just worked you and took the money. They also did other things that took money. For example, didn't you have a sister wife that had children and they actually took her children and got welfare?
Sure.
Explain to our listening audience what they actually did.
The second wife, the reason why I didn't have children is because he wanted me as a workhorse, the breadwinner. I was 113 pounds, 5'5", slim and trim and hard as a rock from all this working and muscles of washing these bottles. So he wanted me for the sex machine. So I'd have to put up with his sexual abuse all the night long and then work all the day long. I just begged God to give me strength so I could do whatever work, because here's the Mormon doctrine, you're supposed to work your way to heaven, by the works you shall know them. So I was going to work myself to death and sign off and say, okay, God, it's finished, I've done enough, this is my last. So I was just willing to work myself right to death to get out of it, because I figured that's the only way I'm ever going to get out of it. The second wife, she had children, and then because the first wife was the one with the marriage certificate, what she'd say is, well, I'm going to claim that these children are mine, that I had them. It's before DNA and stuff. This little girl, Kathleen, was born as I changed the names in the book so that I would avoid a lawsuit, quite frankly. So I put this second wife's name is Zosa, and her real name was Zella, but that's pretty close. So she had this little baby, Kathleen, and the very day that she was born, this Zosa was told by the sucker that was the husband, I'm going to give this little baby to my first wife. She's going to record it as her baby and the birth certificate and everything else. And Zella just become irate. I mean, she's still laying there in the bed. She's still bleeding from having this baby. A half hour has only passed. The first wife's trying to stop the bleeding through Kotexes and stuff. Well, anyways, and I'm watching all this, and she says, well, you can't, Zosa says, well, you can't steal my baby. The old sucker says, well, it's not your baby. It's my baby. She says, well, it's my baby too. And he says, no more than if a man puts a quarter in a Coke machine and the Coke comes out, you can't say that Coke belongs to the machine, but it belongs to the man that put in the quarter. And she says, well, I'm going to go to the law then. And he came over and he grabbed the hair on her head and they shook it. And he says, listen here to me. If you dare to go to the law, I will just tell them that you're insane. They'll take one look at you with that screwy eye, which she always had an eye that would look off to the side, and they'll know that I'm telling the truth. They'll know that you're absolutely nuts, and they'll believe me, and they'll believe Francis. They're not going to believe you. And then the old sucker had his helper, which is this guy that was always sucking up to him, and he says, now, when this little girl gets to be 15 years old, you can take her to yourself for a wife. And Billy says, okay. And he says, this is your reward for you working for me for all these years and helping my family, because he was a truck driver in the business of doing all these bottles. Billy said, okay. Like, wow, this is great. And I remember I was standing by the door jamb of the bathroom, and I had chewed off every damn one of my fingernails right down to the quick, to the blood, and finally I realized that my fingers was just killing me because I had got into the quick, so I was trying to find some duct tape to tape them up. It was an experience I'd never forget, the look on her face, him shaking her, grabbing her hair and shaking her head and hollering at her when she was still bleeding from having the baby, and having this proud, arrogant first wife rejoicing in the fact that now this little baby was going to be called hers. And now why did she want these children? Now, see, she had the mother there, which was held by the chain of, if you ever leave, I will keep your kids. So she's now a servant. She's got to stay there and be Francis' slave and take care of those children. But Francis could get welfare assistance for every child that she had. See?
Oh, Francis used them all to get welfare with.
Yes. That was the goal. And then when she'd get all this government assistance, she would go off with Billy, and they'd go visit relatives and go on trips and stuff like that. And so Zella's left home taking care of the babies, changing the diapers. I remember one time when the little girl was like 3 years old, and she come up and she said something like wah wah or something like that to Zella, who was standing by the sink, like I wanted a drink of water. And Francis said, that little girl just called you mother, didn't she? And Zella said, no, she didn't. She says, yes, she did. And she backhanded her right across the face and whop. She said, well, no, she didn't. She says, damn you, don't you lie to me. You don't ever have that little kid call you mother. So then she goes in and gets the big sucker. He comes in, and, well, he's walking 90 miles an hour like a penguin, because it's kind of how he walked. But he was taking the belt right out of his pants, and he started whipping her, Zella, across the face. And she put up her arms to protect her face, and she had these big welts on her arms. And he says, put down your arms. And she says, no, because you'll hit my face. And he says, put down your arms, damn you. And he just kept beating her. When it was all over with, Zella had these puffy eyes, and all she could see was these little slits, She looked like a prize fighter. That's how badly she'd been beaten. And she had all these bruises all over her face and her arms. And it was all because of that freaking Francis was such a effing liar.
This kind of abuse, it's common.
I know it.
I want the public to know that this is common. Elaborate. Tell them what you have seen.
The woman ended up having, she had Kathleen, David, Charlie, and Paul. So she had 4 children that Frances claimed as her own. I mean, and this is totally asinine, people, because, you know, Frances would have had to have these babies when she was like 52 and 58 or 60, which, you know, but nobody ever questions, you know, it's the way the birth certificates was. Well, when I finally ran away, what I did is I called Kathleen to my side where Zella was, and I said, now, I was there the day you were born, young lady, and I've held a secret. Frances is not your mother. Zella is your mother. You need to know that. Now, the reason I'm telling you this today is because I'm leaving, and I don't know if you'll ever see me again. I cannot stand the abuse that I've suffered under your father. I have other plans in my life, and I will not stay. So you need to look in the mirror and realize how your facial features are so similar to Zella's. Look at your legs. Look at the thickness of your ankles. Look at hers. And I said, look at your height. Look at Frances's. I says, are you not the spitting image of your mother? And Zella was crying with gratitude. But dear God, 15 years she'd put up with this bull, that little girl could not know that she was the mother. And today was the day of reckoning.
Was Kathleen married to Billy?
Oh, yeah. And then when I left, and I went straight to the police force 5 months after I got out of there so that I could continue to run the business, somebody came upstairs and said, I want you to know that Kathleen has just had a baby. And as though I was supposed to celebrate that, I was majorly pissed. I was so bent, and I just like, ooh, God. I had sent the welfare in there right at the time that I left because I knew that this was coming down the pike. But Kathleen would not substantiate the claim. She wouldn't do anything to defend herself because she was so programmed that this is the way it was going to be. Without her wanting to leave, there was nothing they could do. I just felt bad. And I attended her funeral here about a month ago. She'd had 3 children with this man, and then she had colon cancer and passed away. I think she was about 45. Hey, I'm 63, so, you know, that tells you something like that.
When Kathleen married Billy, she was given to him, promised him on the day she was born. How old was she when she married?
That is right. I don't know. I think he started having sex with her when she was like, I don't know if it was 15 or 16. I can't remember. But it seems like it was about 15 or 15 and a half, the same time that I was given to this creep, the other creep. But anyway, that's the way it went, and nobody challenges these guys.
I don't know how many of you are familiar with Ervil LeBaron. He was my brother-in-law. He became known as the Mormon Manson throughout Utah. He had one of the most expensive trials that was ever held in Utah because of his mastermind, minding the killings of almost 30 people. Many of those people were my own nieces and nephews and his own wives. And I would like to explain a little bit about what can happen when you get into a cult. And that's why I wrote the book called Cult Insanity, because I want people to know what can happen to people when they give up thinking for themselves. I moved to Mexico when I was just 16, and I met Ervil LeBaron. He was a very charismatic, good-looking, 6'4" man that had a way of winning everybody over. And the LeBarons, with him and his brother Joel, started a church called the Church of the Firstborn. And their intent was to prepare a group of people that would be a perfect group that they could take into the presence of Jesus Christ when Jesus Christ returned. So we figured that if we lived plural marriage and did everything the brethren asked and were obedient, that we would be able to be counted among those worthy people. Ervil got very mad, angry, because Joel put a stop to him trying to take people's wives away. One time when a man was gone, he took his wife away and had her married to him. When the gentleman came home, she went in the house and he tried to tell her hello, and she said, "I'm not your wife anymore. I'm not your wife anymore." He went out and he said to me, "What's going on?" And I said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but Ervil married your wife while you were gone." Well, Joel, who was the prophet, his older brother, was very angry because Ervil was stealing tithing money. He was usurping authority, taking away people's wives, making threats. That Ervil started to make plans to run the church, undermine Joel. He lied. He borrowed large sums of money, like from a widow woman that came down from Canada. He told her Joel had asked her to loan the money to Ervil, and he would get it back next week. Took thousands of dollars from the woman that never got repaid. So Joel was sickened about it, that his brother did this, and so he removed him from his office, which was the patriarch of the church. Well, this caused a brewing resentment by Ervil, and he was psychotic, and little by little it just escalated, and the next thing we knew, people would be putting to death. And the very first one that he had murdered was his own brother, Joel. He had someone go in and beat him over the head and shoot him to death. It was very, very sad. We were all shocked about what happened. Not too long after that, my own Uncle Lewellyn Allred, who was the leader of the group in Salt Lake City, one of the biggest polygamous groups, he was a chiropractor, a very kind, loving man, and Ervil sent his 13th wife in there and shot my uncle dead and left all these children and wives without a family, without a father. And the thing that was sad is that it struck fear through all of us, that we knew that we were next because we weren't going to follow Ervil. He even told me that I belonged to him, that I should have been his wife, and I lived in constant fear that he would try to either take me away from Berlin or end up killing me. My own husband had to go in hiding for over 10 years. Women are used as breeding stock to keep these cults expanding and alive. We were the pawns of polygamy. We were traded and bartered and given back and forth to raise children so that this man could become a god and own his own world. The fear that went through us, no one can ever imagine unless you have been there. And it was only 10 days after I left Los Molinos that this Ervil, this evil Ervil, sent about 10 of his children and stepchildren and his followers in with shotguns, and they went into the colony there in Baja California, and they had set a 2-story building house on fire. And when it started up in flames, they opened, as people went out to with bucket brigades to put the fire out, they opened with their shotguns, and they wounded 13 people and killed 2. Ervil went on to have almost 30 people killed, and the sad thing about it is he was a heartless madman. He actually had his 17-year-old pregnant daughter that he had given to someone for a second wife. Her name was Rebecca. She was very unhappy. He was afraid that she might reveal some of the plans that they had about murdering people, and he had one of her step brothers will take her out and tell her that she was going to go to the airport and going to go home and visit her mother. And they took her out and strangled her to death and threw her body in the back of a trunk. There's so much that is so horrific and unbelievable that I felt like that I had to write the truth about the LeBarons, about their priesthood, about their claims and becoming gods. But it's really something how they did it through killing people. We were taught that Christ did not pay for our sins. We had to pay with our own blood. And even women, if a woman committed adultery, she was under the death penalty. Yet a man could go out and marry 10, 15 wives.
I was a deputy sheriff for 23 years. I started in 1957. I left for a couple of years, was an insurance adjuster. Most of my time was spent as a detective, either in the juvenile division or the detective division. For 8 years, I headed up the sex crime squad. I've investigated every type of crime imaginable except for treason. I assisted the homicide squad in trying to find Ted Bundy, serial murderers and serial rapists. The civil case, Hill versus Allred, had to be the most important, the cream de cream, the frosting on the cake of my investigative career. Right.
John, explain to the people what blood atonement is.
Well, if you look at it from the Mormon fundamentalist point of view, what you're doing is, it was originally directed at apostates. And they committed a sin so great that the only way they could be saved was to have their blood. And then the smoke from the blood in the earth would go up to heaven and save them.